people who have worked on their PhDs longer than I've been alive. And so
World's youngest professor, Soborno Isaac Bari, who is known as God of Mathematics, has won the Da Vinci Laureate Award from the Da Vinci Institute in South Africa. Professor Soborno Isaac Bari's plane just arrived in Johannesburg, South Africa. Professor Dr. H.P. Klopper came to the Johannesburg airport on behalf of the Da Vinci Institute to welcome Professor Soborno Isaac to South Africa. Many Bangladeshis and Indians came to the Johannesburg airport to greet with the professor. He will also give a keynote commencement speech at the PhD graduation ceremony of the same university.
Professor Soborno Isaac Bari, I see your dad wants you to take your mask off so he can see you smiling. So I see him frantically telling you. We welcome our PhD graduate. And I would like to introduce our wonderful Professor Bari, someone very special to you. I think he's probably the youngest person you've ever seen wearing a red coat. Our laureate this evening, Professor Soborno Isaac Bari. I call upon Sachaba Motsiloa, who is the chair of the Da Vinci Institute Council, to welcome Professor Bari and to give him his award this evening before he delivers his address.
greetings. I am so excited to be here with you all today, to be with such hardworking people who have earned their PhDs after what I assume is years of work. And I assume that there have been many high and low points. And I know that many of you have embraced the darkness that you have met many times, as Miss Marla has already discussed with us. And I am so excited to be here with you. And so I want to start my speech with a quote from one of the greatest minds of South Africa, Nelson Mandela. He once said that education is the best weapon. And I think that my work is an example of that. Education is the weapon that we can use to change the world. Because education is the thing that we teach to every single one of our students. Every single person receives education. And so we must teach them well. And I know that you graduates have just received the highest degree of education you can get. And so I am very honored to be standing with you here today. And now I want to go all the way back to January 4th, 2020. And when I was teaching at Royal College, Dr. Anushree Lacour was first thinking of hiring a guest professor for her physics class. But her colleagues were raising questions about the age of the candidate, because I was only a 7-year-old child at the time. And so the colleagues were thinking, how can this minor give a speech in front of 200 people and teach these guys basic kinematics? How can he do that at 7? Yet the abilities of the child made Dr. Lacour dead set. And the day he came in, he amazed the students. I was that child, and I thank Dr. Lacour for recognizing that age is just a number. Age does not dictate what your education limits are. Age does not dictate anything but the time it has been since you were born. And so I think that is an important thing. It does not tackle your social status. It does not tackle how much skill or education or thought you have. But however, we are so used to it being that way that we think of it as that in our schools, in our homes, and in our systems. And we need to change that. And first, we need to look at how our education is failing our students in general. Our education currently is failing our students, not only in terms of giving them a sense of peace, a sense of empathy, to give them love, to tell them that love is the best thing, to encourage love and peace and respect for one another in the community. We do not engage that, but our education is also fundamentally broken. At the fundamentals, it is broken because we do not teach our students the art of being creative. We do not teach our students being imaginative. We do not teach our students imagination. And so we need to reform our schools. We need to reform our system. And we need to add two things to it: love, peace, empathy, and imagination. Because if we do not add empathy to our systems, then people will use our education, the tools that we have given them, our technology and our discovery, to engineer brutality. It has already been done for the past few decades. We have engineered nuclear bombs, viruses that can completely destroy one's life. And we have discovered weapons that could completely end the entire world if just a few of them are fired. And so, now is the crossing point. Now is a time more than ever that we must decide to love one another, and we must decide to teach empathy in our schools, and in our homes, and in our businesses. Because we must teach empathy and love for one another if we do not want brutality to continue any further. And our education is also fundamentally broken with imagination. We must teach our students creativity. We must teach them how to think creatively, how to connect ideas in ways that they have never thought of before, how to make inferences, and how to think and create new ideas from old ones, and connect them in ways that have never been fathomed before. We need that kind of thing, and we need it now, so we can have better students and better workers. We need a better world. And so we need these kinds of things. We need a better education system. And so I call this educational reform, adding imagination and love, I call it Manish, named after my new book of the same name. And I think that I must start this speech with some tradition before I dive into what I think Manish should include. First, I would like to thank not only the Honorable President for inviting me. I am very honored to be here. But I would also like to thank Honorable Executive Chairman Professor Ben Anderson and Honorable Executive Dean Professor H.B. Klopper for inviting me here. And more importantly, I am very grateful for them. And I am very grateful that they have given me the Da Vinci Laureate Award. And I feel that there are people so much more experienced than me that I am speaking to right now in the crowd. People who have earned their PhDs after years of work. People who have worked on their PhDs longer than I've been alive. And so I am very honored to be here among all these honorable, such talented guests. And so I would first like to start this speech by congratulating all the PhD graduates who have just earned their highest degree in their respective field for education. And so I also am very grateful to the Da Vinci Institute for giving me such a warm welcome, for giving me such warm smiles and handshakes, for giving me such a warm welcome to such a great nation. And I am so honored to be at such a prestigious institution. And so I would like to start by underlining what education is at its basis. Education is in many branches. Education can be history, art, math and science, engineering, medicine, even business and technology, as you people who have just earned your graduates, your PhDs for. And so I am very honored to be here, and I think that education, talking about it, is a big subject, especially when it comes to people who have received their highest degree in education. So education, there are many subjects that are educational, and I don't think that you should force your child to go down one of these paths. You should not force your child to be somebody you want them to be. You should allow your child to choose their own future, choose who they want to be, and to find their own passion. I think you should allow your child to at least be exposed to every single topic that you can at least afford. Math and science, politics, or business, or whatever. If they fall in love with a passion, it is theirs. They have found their hidden love, their hidden talent. And I believe that every single child is born with a hidden talent, whether that it be math or science or not. And so I think that this hidden talent needs to be nurtured. And there are probably millions like me all around the world. I think it's a wonder how none of them have received the laureate award yet. On second thought, it's probably because they aren't being nurtured. They and their talents are not being nurtured. They are not being revealed. Instead, their talent is wasted, and sometimes it is even an issue with discrimination, racially or sexually. And so I think that this kind of thing should not be done. We should allow our children to be exposed to every single subject and to be able to find their own passion, to find what they love, their own subject. I personally fell in love with math and science on my second birthday. When I was younger, my father would start doing. My father was a security guard, but he was also a math student, and so he would be writing down all these equations in the same room that my crib was. And well, I don't think he thought it was a bad idea, but. But he started doing that, and when I was seeing him doing that, I was so fascinated by that magic trail coming out of the chalk. What do these symbols mean? One day, can I learn their meaning? What could those mean? And can they have an effect on the world? I was thinking about those symbols like all day long. And one day I hobbled up enough courage to start copying down the symbols. And I even started hoarding the chalk that my father had under the bed so I could use it from time to time. And so I was really fascinated. And one day my father caught my fascination with all these symbols and how creative you needed to be, and I was really interested in just playing with numbers, being creative, being imaginative, and just doing the playing with these kind of symbols and stuff. And so I was very interested in doing that kind of thing. But our students are not interested in that kind of thing because we don't present math and science to them that way. Sure, we have good arts classes and English classes. For one, the last thing I learned in art was like dot art or something, like making dots on a on a canvas or something. But I think that we teach art or English or things like that fine. But math and science, that is just not the case. We stigmatize it, and we make it seem like only big geniuses can do that kind of thing. When in reality, it is just creativity and imagination. It's something you use just as much as facts when you were talking about math and science. You have gotten so many equations, so many ideas, like recursive equations and whatnot, from just ideas, thinking, being imaginative. We thought of the idea of infinity. We didn't just see it in our world because there was nothing to be seen that is infinite in our world. We thought of it. We imagined it. We were able to make that observation, and eventually so many things stemmed out of it, like recursive systems and whatnot. And so I think that math and science is just as much creativity and imagination as it is all the facts and boring equations. And so creativity, observation, and imagination are three things that you need when you are talking about things like math and science. But schools don't present it that way. Schools present it so you need one thing, memorization. What happens is the school teaches you these equations without any context, then you memorize them, and then you forget them 5 minutes after you receive your test score and you find out it was an F. So the thing is, that is just not how we want things to work in math and science. We cannot have it just a field of memorization because that is not the case. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It is not sticking to the same old principles and rules, but rather the pursuit of knowledge, trying to discover something new. In fact, trying to amend our old rules if we find a mistake in them. And that is what our schools should be teaching. I find that the pursuit of knowledge is much more fun than somebody just telling the lesson plan to your face. It's so not tell. We use it all the time in writing, but why don't we use it in math and science at all? I think that that's a very important thing, to let your students discover, to let your students be creative. And in fact, maybe they will discover something new if they experiment long enough. So this kind of thing is what we need. We don't need schools to be places where they just tell you the lesson plan to your face. That's about as effective as giving your students the folder for the lesson plan and just asking them to flip through it. What you want to do is you want to give the students an experience with creativity, imagination, and you want to give them the freedom to do whatever they want and to do something that leads up to the lesson plan, the main central lesson. You want them to discover the lesson, not to just have the lesson told them to their face. And that is the idea, the essence of imagination, of creativity. And that is what we need to teach in our schools. We need to teach math and science as that. Now, I think that that is extremely important. But we also must teach another central pivotal thing in our schools. The art, the idea, the central idea of empathy, of love, of things like that. We must have love for one another and we must recognize each other as humans. Once we recognize each other as equal humans, there will be no such thing as monsters. There will be no such thing as people killing others for their own beliefs, for their own religion. And unfortunately, in my religion, Islam, there are also many terrorist groups emerging. These groups have recently been ravaging the world and killing many others for their own gain or because those others didn't have the same beliefs, the same ideas as them. But we must learn to recognize one another and realize that others have different beliefs, different ideas. And when we embrace that side of ourselves, when we embrace that we are all different, that we are all unique, and we have different unique ideas, that is the art of empathy. Both empathy and sympathy. You must understand others from either your own perspective or their perspective. That is very important. You must understand what others are thinking, what others are feeling. You must understand others' beliefs. And only then will we get a world without terrorism. A world where people think of another having a different belief as something so criminal that you have to kill them or shoot them in the head for it. And so I think that that is a very important principle, having empathy for one another. But unfortunately, we just don't teach that in schools. In our schools, we forget to teach empathy and peace. We forget to teach people and encourage the peace between all others. And we forget to at least say religion or division of belief does not mean that you're going to kill each other or duel or shoot each other just because you have different beliefs. In schools, they must teach empathy. They must educate us about empathy. And so, I think that that is an extremely important thing that we just don't get in education. And that is why we have war, we have brutality, and we have terrorism. Because we do not teach empathy for one another, and we do not teach love for one another. And you might say, what about resource wars? People just engage in war to get resources sometimes. Well, with enough technological advancement, resources will be in abundance. So there will be no need for war such as that. And so we don't need war. We must leave war behind. And in particular, I am very touched, and I admire the way that Nelson Mandela brought peace to South Africa, and the ANC in general brought peace, not by guns or bombs or weapons, but by using peace negotiation and being peaceful, protesting, not killing one another because they think either that the whites are bad or that they should be elevated above the whites. In fact, they did not fight for black supremacy. They fought for equality. They fought not for racism, but for equality. Just because a tip of the scales doesn't mean anything good. Only equality on the scales, equity, is good. We must recognize each other as equal humans. Nobody is above us as humans. And just because we have different beliefs doesn't mean we are elevated above or below one another. We are all equal as humans, and we must teach that in our schools, in our education. We must teach that to our youth. Otherwise, we will have war raging on for who knows how long. And it has already been raging for the past hundreds of thousands of years, ever since 10,000 BC, when the first real parts of civilization were born. So I think that this is something very important. We must teach our students to imagine. And in fact, I have a very great example from one of my favorite educators. Sir Ken Robinson was a very good man. He was an educator, a British speaker, and an advisor to government on how, an advisor on leaders on how to educate youth. And he once made this joke where he visited this classroom. And there was this teacher who said, hey, class, draw something. And so the students decided to draw it. There was this one little girl in the pack, and she wasn't really a person who paid attention most of the time, but now she was really, real focused on her drawing. And so the teacher went over to her and noticed that and asked her, what are you drawing? And the little girl said, I'm drawing God. And then the teacher said, but we don't know what God looks like. How should you imagine God? And then the girl said, well, they might not know now, but they will in a minute. And so the thing is, the teacher, not only is the teacher being kind of rude to the little girl, but the teacher is also failing to nurture the girl's imagination. Just because a teacher can't imagine something doesn't mean a student should be bound to their constraints. Just because a teacher doesn't have the amount of creativity needed for a subject doesn't mean a student should be modeled to be just like the teacher. Doesn't mean a student should be bound to the lesson plan. I, for one, think that students should be able to have just as much control over the lesson, what's being taught in the lesson plan as teachers do. We want our students to be able to give feedback on our lessons, to be able to show teachers either they need help or they want to move forward on a concept, or they want to show others a new concept that maybe the teacher didn't want to think about, or the teacher didn't have time for, or they think that it's really insightful that the teacher did it that for God. And so we need our students to give feedback on our lesson plans, and we also need our students to be able to imagine, to be able to be creative, even when our teachers are not as creative or not as passionate. But that is another thing, because most of our teachers are not passionate nowadays. Either corrupt education systems have sucked it all out of them, or they just don't have the capacity to be creative or the passion for teaching anymore. We need very passionate teachers. When your student is ready to learn, you need to be ready to teach. You need to be a good teacher for your student. And many teachers use excuses that their student is not doing good, when in reality, they are the ones not nurturing their students' creativity, not nurturing their imagination. And I feel that that is one of the most important things. And so that is what I think that education needs. It needs reform. Now, the thing is, many people don't know what to reform it with. The easy part is knowing that education is crap. The hard part is knowing what to replace it with. So, I think that we should not replace it, but reform it. We need to change our education system. We need to tell the world that empathy, love, and equality for one another is the best thing. And we need to also fundamentally fix our education, because we do not allow our students to imagine. We must give our students the ability to create. The reason why we are getting less and less breakthroughs each year is because our students are failing to imagine. And that's not the student's fault. It's because the school doesn't teach them to. We need to teach our students to be able to imagine, to look in even the darkest places, the places where where they think they might not be anything, and connect even the wildest of ideas in ways that seem unfathomable, but may turn out to be a breakthrough in the future. We need those kinds of students, but our schools don't want to engineer those kinds of students, or they can't, because we don't teach imagination in our system. So, we need to reform education with two things. We need empathy and we need imagination. And we need it now more than ever. When we are at a time when there are many crises that can only be fixed with science, like COVID-19 or our climate crisis, but there are also many crises that are socioeconomic or geopolitical, like the USA or China war, like a possible USA or China trade war, which just happened back in 2018, or the space race between US and China. And I think that this kind of socioeconomic or geopolitical tension can only be solved by empathy, love for one another, and recognizing that we are equal. And just because we might have different systems of life, communism and capitalism, doesn't mean we should be fighting one another and trying to see which one is better. We should be at least embracing that we have the ability, the capacity to think different things, to have different beliefs. And we should not be, I think that China, and I think that in general, we should not be persecuting each other or having war with each other because we have different systems or different beliefs or other things like that. We should be in peace with one another. We should recognize that we have different beliefs. We should recognize that we are all unique, and we should embrace that instead of fearing that kind of imperfection, fearing that kind of change, that kind of uniqueness. We should not fear uniqueness. We should embrace it. And that is what I think is the message of empathy. We need to add that in our system. We need to show that uniqueness is not something to be feared. It is something to be enjoyed. It is something to be embraced. And that is a very powerful and strong message. And we need to convey it to our students now more than ever. When we have nuclear weapons, and a single angry or greedy exchange could end the whole world. So, we need this kind of feeling now more than ever so we can disarm one another and we can be in peace with one another. And we need to fix imagination as well. So, education needs two things, empathy and imagination. Without one, we cannot achieve a world at peace. And without another, we cannot make any scientific breakthroughs fast or rapidly. Sure, we will get a genius in 100 or 200 years eventually. Just look at Newton and Einstein. But those are outliers. We have to make sure every child gets a chance to nurture their talent. Then we could have so many more Picassos or Beethovens or Einsteins or Newtons or, history geniuses. I think that now more than ever is an important time to have empathy. When we are in very tense global conflict and on the edge of war, we must learn peace and empathy for one another right here, right now. And so, we must also give our children the chance to make a breakthrough, to make a difference in our world, to make sure that our world can be different. And so to make sure that every child can make a change and get a quality education. That is one of the most important things in our world. We need to make change. We need to do it now. And so I think that my reform monies is a reform that needs to take place at least in the recent future. We need this reform now because otherwise our world will be at war and our world will be dying because we will not be able to make another breakthrough. We will have to live through the crises that can only be solved with science because it is our fault that we do not get to any creative minds because of our education system. We need to make this reform now because we are on the tipping edge and we are about to fall off a cliff that has a long way down. And so we need this parachute right now. And so I think that this is the best way for education. We need to reform education and we need it now. And so that is why I think that education should be reformed.
On winning the Da Vinci Laureate Award.
Thank you, Sir Isaac Newton. A big fan.
Congratulations, Da Vinci Laureate Soborno Isaac Barry.
Thank you, Albert Einstein. A big fan.
To Bari Science Lab to fall in love with math and science, especially programming.